There are only two questions I should ever be asking when I'm writing. And those are, what is the story I want to tell, and have I told it? That's it. Anything else, ask myself anything else, and I'm not actually writing. So let's dive into those two questions. What is the story I want to tell? This is a very particular question. I have to be merciless about it. The question isn't what is the story that will sell? What's a story that will win me more readers, win an award that my writing group will like? No. What is the story I want to tell simply because I want to tell it? And how do you know it's a story you want to tell? Well, when you lay your attention on it, no effort is required to leave your attention there. You can pay attention to it with no effort whatsoever. It is effortless. In fact, it's like a magnet to your attention. That feeling, that magnetic draw of your attention to that story, that's unconditional love. Unconditional love. In other words, you love the story just because you love the story, just because you love telling it, just because you love paying attention to it, just because you love thinking about it, not because of the result it will get you. And I will tell you from my own experience, back when I was a younger man and I was waiting tables and I wanted a career as a writer, when I thought of a story, part of the question, what's the story I want to tell, was mixed with, and what could I sell? That's not the right question. It's just, what is the story I most want to tell? And I should say that I do the work I'm doing now because once upon a time, maybe 10, 15 years ago, I said I was so frustrated with my situation that when I asked myself, what's the story you most want to tell? When I said, what is the story you could tell regardless of whether it got published or not, the answer wasn't fiction. It just took me a long time to ask it in that way. So that's the first question. What is the story you want to tell? Not what your friend wants to tell, not what your mother wants you to tell. You. What are you interested in? And how do you want to tell it? So that's the first question. You ask that question. And by the way, you keep asking that question because it's also what should come next. What does my hero do for a living? How can I best represent what it was like to be 12 in Providence? You know, the question takes many forms. It's not just the content, not just the story idea, but all along the way, you're asking, well, what does it want to be? And what does it want to be? And what does it want to be? And what does it want to be? Okay, what's the story I want to tell? You keep asking that question. But then there's the second question. Have I told it? That's the question you ask when, after you get the answer to the first question, and then you write, you translate the answer onto the page. That's the writing. But after you translate it and you put it into words onto the page, second question is, have I told it? In other words, you read what's on the page, the thing that you wrote, and you ask yourself, does that capture the story I want to tell? In other words, is it as cool as I think it is? Is it as profound, sexy, interesting? And a lot of times, the answer is no. And that's okay. And that's okay. Now, that's a complicated moment, one that, or can be a complicated moment, and I will address that in future episodes. But the most important part about this question is only you can possibly answer the question. Is that the story I want to tell? Is that accurate? Is what is on the page? Does it match what I am seeing and feeling in my mind? Is it accurate? This is meant to eliminate the other question we frequently ask when we look at our work. And that question is it any good? Now, if you've been listening to this podcast, watching this podcast, you know how I feel about that word. But listen, I often read my work when I was younger, and that was the question I would ask. Is it any good? And that question is really just code for what will other people think of it. That's it. That's what that really means. And they aren't there, so you can't know. And by the way, as I've said before on this podcast, you don't even really care. It's a meaningless question. Is it any good? The only question you should and could ask at that moment is that what I want? Does that match it? And if you let that be the only other question you're asking after what's the story I want to tell, now you are in the realm of your true power. You are asking questions that you can answer. You can answer both those questions, can't you? Yes, you can. You can answer the question, what's the story I want to tell? And by the way, you're the only one who can answer that question, can't you? Yes, that's right. Only you can. And who can possibly answer the question is what's on the page. Is that the story I want to tell? Nobody knows what was up here. Nobody knows what was in my mind. So they don't know if what's on the page matches what I wanted to write. They can tell me if they like it or not. They can tell me if they get it or not, but they don't know if it matches. What's the story I want to tell, and have I told it? Writing is all about questions. I ask the question, something else answers. And so my job is to learn to ask the right questions, the questions I want to answer. And once I do that, the rest gets easy. It does. Thanks for watching. As always, if you like it, click subscribe so you don't miss a dose, a little dollop of inspiration. And if you do like it, leave a note. Click like. That helps other people find it. All right, until next time, this is Bill Kenower. Stay fearless.